Hi, welcome back. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about the NHL general managers circumventing the salary cap and how they're going about it. So I came up with 4 simple ways that are currently going on with the circumvention of the salary cap. Some of these general managers took advantage of it this year and some in previous years. So the first way that GMs are circumventing the cap is by putting players on LTIR. LTIR is long-term injury reserve. That's when a player has to be out a minimum of 10 games in order to be able to be put on LTIR. And while they're on LTIR, the team can use a portion of that salary in order to bring other players onto the team through either a trade or bringing them up from the minors. Again, depending on their contracts, we're trying to keep this simple. So they put players on LTIR, and then they can use a portion of that salary to add additional players to the roster. So the most famous example of this happened last year. I think it was last year. No, the year before, in 2020, 2021, with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and putting Kucherov on LTIR for the entire season. They used a portion of his salary, which was, I think his salary was around 13 million or maybe a little bit less, 9 million, I think. But anyway, they used a good portion of that salary to bring other players onto the team, either through trades or signing players to take up that space. And it, to help the team through the season. And then what they did was at the end of the season, they brought Kucherov back. Mysteriously, he was good to go for round 1, game 1 of the playoffs. He didn't look rusty at all. And, there was a lot of outcry that Tampa had purposely took advantage and circumvented the salary cap through LTIR. The second way that GMs are circumventing LTIR is by buying contracts of injured players with the intention of putting those players or keeping those players on LTIR. And again, another example, it happened last year with Tampa. Again, Tampa, by buying Brett Seabrook's contract, which was, I think it's another 3 years after this year, another 2 years after this year. But at the time they bought it, it was 4 years of LTIR that they purchased. And I think it was around $6 million. So they could use a good portion of that to increase their space in the cap to, fill the void with other players. And, Tampa was really in a lot of cap restriction because they were really tapping out their cap. But when they put Kucherov on LTIR and then they came into the playoffs in 2020, 2021, the year that the first cup win, they were like 13 million over the cap in the playoffs of any other team that they were playing. And so that was an unfair advantage there. And it really showed. And then again, this past year, buying Brett Seabrook's contract, again, Tampa circumventing the cap, and they walked into the playoffs, again, 9 million, I think it was, over the cap from any other team. The third way that GMs can circumvent the cap is by finding a third team to act as a broker in exchange for picks. So let's say that a team wants to get a player and bolster their team, but they only have 5 million in cap space and the player was worth 10 million. They can contact and broker a deal with a third party team to take on that extra 5 million in exchange for picks. Deals go different ways and that sort of thing. So I'm going to leave that to, the GMs themselves, because we're not really concerned about the deals themselves. Each one is unique on their own, but it's the portion of retention of salary to broker a deal through a third-party team in exchange for picks. And the last way to circumvent the cap is the losing team that's losing the player retains a certain portion of the salary. So this doesn't involve a third broker because the losing team, that player maybe isn't going to resign with this team. So they trade them for something and they get picks in return and maybe a prospect or two, depending again on the caliber of the player being traded. So those are 4 ways that the salary cap can currently be circumvented. And when I say circumvented, I don't mean they're all illegal. They're all within the rules. It's the intention that is up for conversation. So putting players on LTIR, and there's a legitimate reason for that. All teams have done it, but there's also the intention of putting someone on LTIR, grabbing more players so that you have more talent, and then going into the playoffs and you're utilizing everybody. That's not really that fair, is it? Because, look at Tampa again in my previous example, where they were 13 million over the cap over any other team they were playing, which was completely unfair. And it was just, was it a coincidence? I don't know. There's no evidence to the contrary. It's just left up for debate. So those are the 4 ways. And here I came up with 2 ways to prevent circumvention in the salary cap. So the first one was that if teams go into the playoffs, they must be cap compliant. That'll really solve a lot of the issues with resting a player on LTIR, and then game 1, round 1, they're good to go. They're ready for the playoffs. If the teams still must be cap compliant for the playoffs, it's going to dissuade using LTIR for other than what it's there for. Okay, so you're not going to have teams putting players in LTIR with the hopes that as soon as we get to the playoffs, you can pull as many as you want off of that. The second way, and of course, with the teams being cap compliant in the playoffs, that can be negotiated. Like, let's say that the rules are a little different, but with the intention of they have to be cap compliant, maybe increase the roster size so that, because the playoffs, there's a lot of injuries that take place, and teams that go further and deeper into the playoffs need more players. So if they're cap compliant, but the roster size increases by like 3 or 4 players, or maybe increase the cap 10% to make room for those 4 extra roster players, that's, a little better than resting a $13 or $9 million player and then bringing him in for the playoffs. It could be all negotiated. It's just an idea of you could, dissuade teams from taking advantage in that regard. Another way to prevent the circumvention of the salary cap is that players on LTIR at the end of the season must sit for the first round of the playoffs. That's another easy way to dissuade taking advantage of the salary cap. So if players are on LTIR going into the end of the season, they must sit for the entire first round of the playoffs. And if these rules were in place, then Tampa wouldn't have been able to have a $13 million advantage in the salary cap in 2020, 2021. And they certainly wouldn't have been able to bring Kucherov back for round 1, game 1 of those playoffs if these rules were in place, because he would have had to sit until the second round. Now, you could argue that would have made the difference and Tampa wouldn't have gone any further. Who knows? The games have already been played. The advantages were already taken. So, take it for what it is. But I thought I would do a video on the salary circumvention just because there's a lot of talk about it at this time of the year. If you happen to like this video, click on the like. And if you enjoyed the content, subscribe, click the bell notification so that you will get notified every time I upload a video. I appreciate you, and thanks for watching.